Sure you're in the right place. This is the sex and racism one. Wonder what you heard about this morning's session. I will introduce the panel. We don't have Gwen Jones-Davis, whom we'd hoped to have. She's quite ill and could not come. We have Lillian Anthony was kind enough to remain for the morning session, had to leave for this afternoon. So as sex is often improvised, the panel is currently improvised. I am Mary Howard on the faculty here in psychology. That's not the reason I was chosen for this panel. I have a suspicion it's because of an error I made a couple of years ago in response to a statement. Some of you know about it. I won't repeat it. Sumner Jones on the staff at the Way, Ron Palosaari, English department here at Augsburg, Ellen O'Neill, staff TCOIC, and Joe O'Neill, staff TCOIC. I was trying to decide how to start this morning. Lillian Anthony kind of took it over and went ahead. I'm going to make a brief introduction and then, I think at that point turn it over to Ron to make a statement and to Sumner to make a statement. Joe and Ellen said that they did not come prepared to make a statement but will instead discuss. Can you hear me without the mic? You're frowning. Can you hear? Anybody can't hear me back there? Okay.
How can you tell?
Well, I don't know. If they can't hear me, then maybe they'd raise their hands and frown. I was sort of curious as to why we had a panel with this title, and several people raised the question after the session this morning and also before the session. I thought about it a little bit. I think it's appropriate. I think it's particularly appropriate because, though not the reason for racism, insofar as the thinking person is concerned, it is the reason for racism so far as the average person is concerned. And on the basis of a number of myths. And myths are usually built on a tiny amount of fact and a great deal of intention with purpose. The myth of sex as attached to racism developed during slavery times as a means of supporting the economy and was done very, very successfully. A few of the myths that I think are particularly pertinent to this topic, and I will give some of the facts and some of them you will want to raise questions about. They're old, and I'm sure you know better, but I'm going to call them to your attention because even though you may know some of these things, you don't stop to think about them. One of them is that the Negro is anatomically and physiologically different. That was exploded during World War II. French people ran around and looked for the tails on Negro males, and they didn't find them. Most people know better now. Secondly, that the Negro is particularly vigorous. As Edgar Pillow pointed out this morning, the majority of the Negroes are poor, and poor people, the majority of the poor people, are sick, weak, tired, and generally not vigorous. However, there are a few things that do support the idea that the Negro is fairly strong and adaptable, one of them being that he simply has survived all of the many indignities to which he has been subjected from the time he came over on the slave ship until now. And he's still here, and in fact is growing in terms of numbers. Third, that the Negro is happy. That's a stupid idea. No one who is poor, unhealthy, forced to be subjugated to someone else is happy. He may put on a happy face for you because it's unsafe for you to know him if he's in a weak position. You defend yourself by not letting other people know too much about you. It's only in the last 10 years that you've gotten to know the Negro. And you're possibly aware of that. We've known you for a very, very long time because it was necessary to our survival to know you. And we've known you from your kitchens through your living rooms. And many of you have never been in the homes of a Negro. And this has been true over the years. Fourth, the Negro is irresponsible. The males could not get jobs for years, as such could not support their families, and as frustrated individuals will do, they leave the situation. There was a precedent for this in the sense that during slavery times, the Negro, married Negro, had no rights whatsoever insofar as his family was concerned. He was simply sold out. If it was convenient to sell the children, they did so and left the husband and wife there. If it was convenient to sell the wife, they did so and left the father and the children there, or whatever situation. Usually the children went with the mother. This precedent was set for the Negro family, that marriage really had no meaning for the family. Furthermore, the mothers generally took very good care of their children and still do. This is a tradition among the poor people. They take as good a care of their families as they possibly can, and unlike the wealthy person, they do not leave their children to the care of other people. They may not be able to stay there all day because they're out working, but when they come home, they are there with their own children. Another myth, that the Negroes represent a race. There is only one race, period. Another one, that if you're light, that if you have a lot of white blood, that you are more intelligent. A book was published even to that effect 2 years ago by a South Carolinian psychologist. He proved it by his test. You can prove lots of things with statistics if you twist them. And he did a very good job of it. The fact that there were more Negroes who were educated and who did have reasonably decent jobs occurred because during slavery times those who were miscegenated, if you like the term, were also the ones who were educated by their white fathers. And a social class grew up within the Negroes that was built on color. And one of the things that disgusted me when I was a child was the society of the blue-veined. And if you could see the blue vein in your arm, you belong to the elect group. I happened to be able to see the blue vein in my arm, and I rejected that group because I thought it was one of the most silly things, even at age 10, that I'd ever heard. And finally, that the Negro women are morally free. I have been accosted on the street by strangers and propositioned. One time by a policeman in a police car cruising down the street in the middle of downtown Birmingham. I am so constricted I make myself sick. It would never dawn on me to flirt with anyone. I was propositioned by the policeman. Another time I was propositioned by a person walking down the street when I was on my way home from work after dark. I have never been propositioned by a Negro male stranger. I wonder who's morally free. In Alabama, there is a sheriff of a small town, a white sheriff, who is married, with quotation marks, to a Negro. He acknowledges her as his wife, acknowledges the children as his children, and they attend the white school. And no one makes any remarks about her. He could not at that time, and I don't know whether the law has changed in the last 2 years or not, could not marry her legally, because legal marriages were not possible in Alabama, and I think this is still so. I have 2 white female friends there who are married to Negro males, and they simply designate themselves as Negroes. All right. With those comments, I will turn it over to Ron Palosaari.
I feel like an anticlimax, you know. No pun intended. How many of you were here this morning? Because I don't want to make the same. Not too many. I hate making you identify yourself, but I'll make a little bit of the same pitch then. Last summer, I have 2 daughters and a son, and my 4-year-old daughter was outside playing with my 2-year-old son, and a neighbor wandered by and said to my daughter, your brother has a nice tan, doesn't he?" And my daughter, indignant that she had not gotten any praise, says, "Yes, but he is Negro, you know, and they are darker." We decided after we had adopted 2 Caucasians and talked about a mixed racial child for a long time to adopt Michael. And soon Michael will be joined by his brother, who we have not yet seen but are told is coming. And so I'd like to just mention the situation of interracial adoption. We did not adopt Michael because we thought that we could give him the greatest life in the world. Obviously, being my son, is not exposed to me 24 hours a day is not the greatest situation you can imagine. But we adopted Michael because we thought not only could we provide a home for a child who needed adoption, as adoptive children do, but it also would be a healthy and good experience for my two Caucasian daughters. It would be, and it has been, a good experience for us because Michael has given to us far more than we will ever give to him. But we, of course, I think like most people who have ever adopted a mixed racial child, are a little bit frightened about the future. We want Michael to be proud of both his white heritage and his black heritage, or Negro heritage, depending on which word you prefer right now. And this is going to be hard because we know that he's going to face hatred, stupidity, meanness of various kinds. And of course the tension will probably come, the reeling will get probably tough when he gets into high school or college, because this is when the question of sex and racism will most obviously appear. What will we tell Michael to do about dating? Well, our choice, which we've talked about before, is Michael, can date any girl he's brave enough to ask out, you see, whether she, no matter what shade of color she is, race, creed, or any other religion, any other thing like that. And the same goes for marriage. Some people have suggested, usually not directly to us, well, if a child is Negro or partly Negro, why shouldn't the Negroes adopt him? Well, for one thing, it is the whites in our society, in our unjust society, who can afford the adoptions. And I would ask you today, why don't you right now consider, when you get married, most of you are only a few years from prime breeding time, when you get married, rather than just populate the earth with others like you and contribute to the population explosion, after you've had a child or two naturally, or even before, why not consider adoption? And if you consider adoption, why not consider racially mixed children? Because then as now, there will probably be more of them than there are homes to receive them, and these kids need home. There's over 30 children, racially mixed children in Minneapolis right now, who could go into homes if the homes were available, and the only reason they're being kept out is because of the prejudice of our society. Think about it. There are families in our town now who, even though they could have natural children, have adopted racially mixed children because they felt that they were, in a sense, contributing more to life by having this kind of family than the one which is in greater vogue in our society. It's something to think about. But it's very curious to us as we see Michael around our house, and he doesn't have any special problems that we can think of now, except, normal problems for a 2-year-old, that someday some father is going to say, well, that black bastard isn't going to date my daughter. Michael happens to be, light brown, but he'll be called that, I suppose, you see. And this will involve us right in. What is there about Michael that is going to frighten some parents so much that they, before they ever know him, will say, I don't want him to date my daughter? This is the whole question of race and sex in our society, which my child is going to be a part of. And I'll turn it over to Sumner now for one view on what the situation is, why it is something like this.
Yeah, I think.
I think it's time that we begin to blame the irresponsible actions of any society, with each and every individual member of that society. We have to blame all of Germany, including the Jews, for Auschwitz. We've got to blame the entirety of Western Europe for the predicament that the American Indian is in. In the same sense, we have to blame the entire world for that institution of slavery, which resulted in the ultimate total dehumanization of black people in this country and other countries. This brings it down to a personal level. We talked a great deal about sex this morning, and I imagine that's why most of you are here. Because you heard, man, there's a pretty racy discussion going on in that group. I'd like to concentrate more on the racism aspect of it now. Because that's something that you people can do something about. You don't recognize the fact that you, as college students, are perhaps the most powerful group of people in the country. Most of you are old enough to vote. All of you are old enough to demonstrate. I say that you carry this power because you're the good people, you're the strivers. You're going after what the society says you should have and using the tools that the society says you should use to get it. So nobody's going to disagree with you. If you people say that the society has to change, and you say it convincingly enough, you can bet that the society will change. But it's interesting that those who recognize most the need for change in the society tend to rather drop out from it than stay in it and work. It isn't through dropping out that we'll accomplish anything, nothing at all, but rather by plunging into the world, by getting our hands dirty, by working, and working like hell, admittedly, to change things. You are the people that have to put pressure on the trade unions. It won't mean much coming from me. You're the people that have to put pressure on the police force. It's obvious that they aren't going to listen to me. So you see what I mean? You are the people that can change things. But you're operating from a basically racist point of view. Every one of you. The saddest thing about it is that when people tell you that you're racist, you get up in arms and say, man, I'm not a racist. Don't believe it. Never have. Never will. I contend that you are because you can't help being anything else. In a society that governs every institution the way that this society does, the racism is bound to show up, and it's bound to show up in the products of that institution. Education. What we mistakenly call education is actually social training. You get one side of history. That side is naturally distorted because you're leaving the other side out. You can't possibly know the truth about your own history unless you know the history and the truth about the history of related peoples. And nobody can tell me that black and white people in this country haven't been related. The relation, admittedly, has been one of oppressed to oppressor. But that relationship says a great deal, and it shapes the history. We haven't talked about it. We haven't talked about it honestly. We run around thinking that George Washington was a great man, fantastic man, fought for freedom on all levels, while he held 42 slaves. We call Abraham Lincoln the great emancipator. You have to realize that Lincoln was only human. I'm sorry to destroy any myths that you may have built up. I hope you don't cry yourself to sleep tonight over the fact that Lincoln was indeed human, and necessarily a product of his times. He himself said in a letter to Horace Greeley that what he was concerned with was saving the Union. And if he could do that by freeing half the slaves, he would. If he could do it by not freeing any of the slaves, well, then he'd do it too. But to him, the black people would always be second-class citizens. That's understandable. Because he was dealing from that orientation in the society, and I think that we've perpetuated it just about long enough. We're waking up to the fact, or some of us are, that black people are like any other people. We're good, we're bad, we're beautiful, and we're ugly. Just like you. We aren't asking anybody to distort history in our favor. We can't do that, otherwise we'd be just as bad as the people that wrote the history before. What we're asking for is the truth. What determines a person's humanity today is in large part what he did yesterday. You recognize a person as human in relation to what group he comes from, in correlation to what you know about that group, and you know damn little about my group. You know certain things for facts. I ate a hell of a lot of watermelon, and I'm congenitally happy, when in fact there's nothing for me to be happy about. I sing songs and dance and try to get into every white woman's bed that I see. These are myths. Myths that were necessarily initiated, but foolishly perpetrated, perpetuated. Because at the time of slavery, you had to have some sort of rationale for doing what you were doing. So you said, okay, these are subhuman beings, so we can do anything we damn please to them. But somewhere along the line we became human beings, as individuals, still not as a group. And we haven't reached that status as a group yet. But you begin to see individuals within that group who did have certain human characteristics. We cried when you hit us. We laughed when you tickled us. We even fell in love. All that which you consider human. So we acquired as a group a sort of 3/5 human status, and you realized that you could no longer do this sort of thing to us, so you didn't enslave us physically anymore. The mental chains are still there, however, and the mental chains were put there intentionally. Happened at the Berlin Conference, 1885, I think, where the major powers of Europe were splitting up the continent of Africa and decided that no African history would be taught, except in relation to Egypt, and Egypt only as it related to the building of the Greek and Roman empires. You can't possibly talk about the Greek and Roman empires without talking about Egypt. Anybody that's taken history knows that. Anybody who's taken history ought to know that you can't possibly talk of civilization on any level without talking about the primary civilizations in the Nile Valley. You've got to go back all the way. England didn't just spring up overnight. It had its predecessors, and you know nothing about them. I think education is the key. More specifically, I think that Afro-American history is the key to solving many of the problems that we have now. And you're the people that can get it into the curriculum, not only of this school, but every school in the state. I'd like to see it in every school in the country, but I'm no dreamer. I'm at least realistic enough to realize that not every state is going to allow this. Frankly, I'd be very surprised if Minnesota did. But as I said, you people do have a great deal of power, and you're wasting it. I ran into not really a friend, but a guy I went to high school with. And my high school was so small that I couldn't help noticing him every day. He said he'd really like to get involved. And I said, good. He said, but it'd have to be next fall, because I'm traveling this summer. What are your priorities? Travel if you wish. If things go on the way they are going on, one summer you may travel and not have a place to come home to. Because we're tired of talking. And we're dealing with what is a revolutionary question. And the answers are actually in history. But history has been distorted so we can't see them there. History at best is not what went on, but what we think went on. But the form of history that we teach is a form that portrays what we wish had gone on. Which seems to me to be a supreme insult to the intelligence of every single one of us that are taking it. Except we're conditioned to take that sort of insult. Realize your own worth as individuals. And you won't be able to go into history classes and laugh at your professors because they're telling you totally ridiculous things. Ask them. Ask them what happened to all the black people during the 200 years that cowboys were roaming around. What happened to them? Put them on a boat and go back to Africa? No, they were there. I once saw Sammy Davis Jr. doing an impression of a cowboy. But it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen, man. He had a big white hat on and 2 guns and was walking bow-legged and all that. I just fell out laughing, called people, hey man, look at this. This nigga thinks he's a cowboy. Well, it's true. See? The black people made up the main body of what you call the cowboys. And the really bad cats, I mean the mean ones, you've never heard of. We were cowboys. Not only did we fought Indians, we rode with Sitting Bull. We helped capture Sitting Bull. We played a very important role in building this country, and I don't mean only physically. I don't mean that we just built the houses. We built the heritage of what is now America. And sometimes I'm ashamed to admit it, but it's true. We're the people that you're talking about when you talk about the people that persevered. That's us. Because there's no more persevering group of people in this country. We've been here 14 straight generations, almost 100% American born. And there's no other group like that. Been in every single one of your stupid wars. Every one of them. And right now, the front lines of Vietnam look like the football team from Howard University. We've died for you, we've fought for you, we've sweated for you, and got nothing in return. We've been operating under a mistaken assumption that we have some sort of legitimate responsibility to this country, but we can't possibly have a responsibility to this country because we don't see ourselves reflected in it anywhere, not in the political system and certainly not in its history. So we can't feel like we're a part of it. The only way we see ourselves reflected is in the myths, the sexual myths, and the others. The stereotypes, Amos and Andy. Amos and Andy isn't me. That's about all I have to say.
Seeing a woman creeping up on me.
I don't think it's really all he has to say, and there will be. I want to leave time for questions. I don't know. This morning it was rather quiet. You've had time to think it over, so we'd like to hear about it this afternoon. I'm sure you don't agree with all of us. I'll give you one fact that perhaps will eventually get in the history books. In Virginia, Nevada, one of the best divorce areas in the country outside of Alabama. You can run in there and stay for a few days and get a divorce. There is a monument to a person known as Bloody Mary. And Bloody Mary ran a house of prostitution. She was one of the richest women in Virginia, Nevada. I don't know about Virginia, Minnesota. A lot of the money that she made went into the building of San Francisco, and nobody knows about her unless you happen to go to Virginia, Nevada. It's right a few miles outside of Reno. I have an announcement to make. Dudley Riggs' Brave New Workshop will present a 1/2 hour specially written drama for our one day in May in Melby Hall at 4:30. There is no charge. The evening session with Milt Williams will begin at 6:30 and held in the College Center lobby. Now, Ellen said initially that she didn't want to say anything except in response to questions, and we pumped her now, or primed her or something, and she wants to make a few comments before we open it up to you. Okay?
I wanted to go back to some of the comments that Mr. Palosaari had made, and this is one very basic area in the area of attitudes. And he talked about his youngster who would perhaps be facing many attitudes when he got to the teenage years of dating and courtship and this kind of thing. You know, I think one of the big test questions in our society is, would you want your daughter to marry one? And this always comes up in most conversations that you know, you'll be involved with. And I think because of this, we structure our society in a way that it makes it very unlikely that little Johnny, who happens to be black, and little Mary, who happens to be white, will ever get together. And so that this type of thing, this fear of any kind of interracial communication, I think has a great deal to do with the way we see our society structured. As far as attitudes are concerned, now I happen to be married to a man who happens to be black, and so you find yourself constantly being confronted with all kinds of attitudes. They may not be overt, like bricks crashing through the window or anything, you know, spectacular like this, but they're very subtle, condescending, patronizing kinds of things that I'd like to share with you. You perhaps have had these kinds of reactions or have seen these kinds of things happen. Of course, the first question that anybody will want to know was, how did you two ever get together? You know, this is a real puzzling kind of question. It seemed, you know, a nice girl like you, I had people say to me. And this is a common response. Another thing is, oh, but the children, and I'm sure you've all heard this. Well, in this society of ours, if you're 1/32nd of a black man, you're considered a black man in the society. So it really doesn't make any difference. The child is black as far as our society is concerned. So that usually takes care of that question. Another interesting kind of thing that you get are the curiosity seekers. And you get many invitations to dinner, you know, and they want to see how you act and how you eat and, you know, if you're just like they are. And so it goes. Another thing, you are identified as a black person. For instance, the other evening I was talking to someone about politics, and we were discussing the candidates, and he immediately said, oh no, you couldn't be from McCarthy because Negroes don't like McCarthy. So this is another bag that people fall into. So as I said, they're very subtle, but the disaster about them is that they don't respect you as an individual and look at you as a person. You know, you're this type of person, or you're treated in a special way, and you know, it just makes it all the worse. And another thing, stereotypes. You know, the girl who happens to marry a black man. Well, there's a whole list, and I'm sure you're pretty much aware of them. She has to be a beatnik or a neurotic or someone with loose morals. All sorts of things that people are hung up about. So I just wanted to throw these things out to you, and maybe we can get some response.
One more comment. I'm sorry about that. Not directly on sex and racism, but have you ever thought about the fact that it's peculiar that the white person has been so weak and so incapable of thinking for himself that laws had to be set up to protect him from the Negro? I.e., you may not go to school with the Negroes, you may not eat in their restaurants, you may not do this, that, or the other. Not to protect us. Nobody thought about us. But to protect the white person, it was necessary to set up these laws. Comments? Questions, reactions to the panel? Yes, I think this was up first. No status involved here. One of the problems we had was that the questions could not be heard earlier. Will you scream, please?
I thought this was a remarkably good presentation, but I wondered whether you could name us one good Afro-American history.
One Afro-American history text?
Yes.
Oh, man.
That covers it well.
W.E.B. Du Bois is coming out with a 19-volume history. You've got many. Man, go to New York sometime. Go to the Schomburg collection in Manhattan. An entire library.
If the people here wanted to get a good one-volume history, what would you recommend?
I wouldn't recommend a one-volume history. I wouldn't do it. If you want a bibliography of books, we've got them at the Way. We've got a bibliography of, something like 1 million books. Read them all.
Sumner, I think what he's saying is that, it's sort of like beer. You have to start with a little bit first. And they can't read them all, and he can't assign them all at one time. Ellen, did you?
One basic text that we've been using in minority history classes is Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett, which gives you, it's sketchy, but it gives you a start. And it's very well written.
Oh, and another one suggested was Crisis in Black and White.
Charles Silverman.
Charles Silverman. Silberman. The gentleman here.
Yes, I just wondered, would you put Afro-American history as a separate course, or would you try to incorporate it with?
It's got to be a separate course.
Yeah, and then would you try to rid our history of our wrong statements and put the correct ones in there, or what?
I think, may I? Just a general comment. The pendulum has to go all the way to the other side before it can get back in your history books. And I think maybe now it does have to be a separate course and then integrated with, so that you do have a correct history of America. But right now it's got to be separate because there's so much that's been left out. And as all textbooks are, pieces will have to be picked out to be tucked in appropriately, but right now it can't be.
Right now, I think it's very important that students begin to recognize the fact that, when you talk about Washington, D.C., it was a black man that designed it. I think that's important. Or if you sneak that into a history course, just straight American history course, people are going to be outraged, because I don't think that history should have to label in terms of black and white. It shouldn't have to, but it does now, and it's got to be in a separate course.
Question?
Yes.
In our society, it seems that a white man has
Louder.
traditionally had a right to have a Negro woman if he wants, but a white girl does not have a right to have a Negro man. And this relationship between the sexes seems rather peculiar. And I wonder if this says something very bad, or says that our concept of the relation of man to woman in American society is somehow basically wrong.
The question was that in our society it's been all right for a white man to have a Negro woman, but not for a Negro male, and I haven't decided what I want to call me either, Negro male to have a white woman. Joe would like to respond to that. Is that the gist? I know you said more than that, but is that the gist? He says there's something wrong with our society in this respect, right? Is that close enough?
Well, it seems to show a kind of pathology in our understanding of the meaning of sex and of the relation of man to woman.
He says it's pathological, it's neurotic to have this kind of setup in terms of our sexual and interhuman relationships.
Well, for one thing, it certainly has put the white man has been in a very advantageous position. He's been in a position of having his cake and eat it too. I'm glad you mentioned that because in one AAE class, Armchair Adult Education class, here recently, this deals in minority history. A lady I asked her, what did she believe was the reason for so many different colors, hair textures, and facial features among black people? And she said, well, I just thought they came that way, you know. And I pointed out to her that, you know, all of this cry about integration, you know, integration has been going on since slavery time, but it has been going on in a one-way street, like you mentioned. It's the white male who enjoyed it. So I always feel that the white woman certainly has been discriminated against and deprived, and I go along with Thurgood Marshall is that many parents apparently does not give their daughters too much credit for having very much intelligence. You know, they can always say no, but they don't want to give them that freedom. They want to say no for them, you know. And earlier, Mrs. Howard mentioned that she had been accosted on the streets in Alabama. Well, I'm here to tell her that I've lived across this nation from Los Angeles to Boston, and this is a problem for black women all across this nation, including Minneapolis. And if you don't believe it, you can go down on Hennepin Avenue tonight, and I will show you. And the men who patronize these women, prostitutes, are middle-class people because poor people can't afford them, and certainly not black men. I don't say that this is anything that makes one necessarily superior or inferior. It's a fact of life. What I'm trying to say is, you see, the most rabid racists of the South, many of them have participated in nighttime integration. Some of you perhaps have wondered why of the interracial marriages that does occur, that most of it is from the black man, white woman relationship. Well, that's very easily explained in my opinion. You see, the white man, he can go out and leave the suburbs and come to the city and play and go back, and he's still respected in his community. But most importantly is his status and economics plays a part. So the black man has been economically deprived all his life, so really don't have that much to lose. And well, I do admire any woman. I'm one of those who do not like to be told what I can and cannot do. And to the extent possible, I'm going to do what I feel that I should do, regardless of what society says. I have certain standards that I live by, but I not only try very hard, I believe that I am so secure within myself as a person, I don't have to worry too much about what Johnny Jones does next door, or how you may part your hair. I feel that I'm an individual and I have a right, and it makes me less of a human not to feel that I can do things that satisfy whatever standards that I may have. Now, I don't know whether I answered your question about that. This is a very strong point with me, because this has been something that has been kept under the rug for quite so long, and it's so obvious, you know, that that something has been going on. I mean, there have been some jumping over the fences and things like this, and the very ones who shout the most about so-called miscegenation and all of this are the very ones who are the most guilty of it.
We're going to let one of the minority members of the panel say something.
Lily and Anthony covered this morning. We talked about it, so I'd just like to mention some of the things we mentioned. One thing, of course, is that given the situation of slavery, it was very easy for the white man to take advantage of the Negro woman, but obviously not for the Negro man to do anything about it. And in this case, there grew up a split in the white man's mind, which I really believe in, where the Negro woman became associated with that which was animal about sex, whereas they could elevate the white woman, who was not then a sexual object, until she became a symbol of purity. A man wants a woman in two places, one on a pedestal, the other in the bed. And it's a very easy division when you put mentally the Negro woman in the bed and the white woman on the pedestal, which happened in the South and which has affected the North. Now, consequently, the Negro woman became associated with sexuality. And as Richard Sargent mentioned this morning in his southern town, it seemed like white men sometimes needed to go down to the Negro district. There they could be quote-unquote evil. Then they could come back to the white district and again be church members and again be pure. But that was the place where they could expose, the darker side of themselves, to use the language. At the same time, though, something else happened. And that is when the white woman was assumed to be so sexually pure, holy, and the Negro man was associated with that which was brutish or animal-like, that stereotype, the Negro male became sexually charged. Until now we have the situation where I believe, and I think of course that this varies a great deal, as to what the individual is, but the Negro male and the Negro female both are sexually charged, partly to the white community, partly because they're forbidden, partly because of prejudices, partly because of the remnant of slavery. As I mentioned this morning, it seems to me that one of the reasons for the popularity of these dark stockings is that on the white girl they suggest at least that she is Negro from the waist down and white from the waist up. I really think they carry a positive sexual charge. In a stocking manufacturer back there is giving me But now, I am not saying that all of you who are white, or all of us who are white, have this, to the same degree. But I think it is a part of our society. And I think our fear of Negro sexuality is there. In Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, that's the only love picture I've seen in 20 years where the only kiss was through a mirror in the back seat of a car. You only got a glimpse of it, you see. Think if it had been a white couple. There had been necking scene after necking scene. But still, on the film, we are so afraid of Negro sexuality that it had to be just suggested through a bumpy mirror.
Other? Yes.
Well, I think that what Mr. Palosaari has said, since I might take a course from him next year, I agree with him 100%. But I think that this is really quite true, and I think that a book that shows this...
Come here.
Yeah, if he's going to agree with me, let him speak.
Yeah.
Well, I think that a book that really shows this, strangely enough, would be Lady Chatterley, where she didn't want to be on this pedestal. And she didn't want to be honored. She wanted, the way we tend to put the white woman on this pedestal, she wanted to be more or less the sexual and passionate nature that we tend to associate, I think, the Negro woman with somewhat. And she had a terrible time getting along with society. No one would respect her at all because of this. And so I think this is shown. And another thing that I wanted to say before is on the question of intermarriage. When I was working at St. Mary's Hospital the night that Dr. King was assassinated, and of course everyone in the place was talking about it, and some people said, good, we got another one out of the way, which I felt like walking off the job right there. I almost did, but since I'm poor, I stayed.
Wise decision.
And anyway, this one woman, of course, talked about it, and she said, oh, I think it's a terrible thing, it's awful. And she went on and on like this, and they're wonderful people, and implying they're wonderful people as long as they stay, away from my neighborhood. And then finally she said, oh, but of course, I don't believe in intermarriage. And she went on like this. And I'm thinking, this woman is saying, well, I'm not prejudiced. However, I am prejudiced, is what it amounts to.
Thank you. You may be interested to know that the first time a jury in the South got concerned about murder and mutilation of a Negro, was when a Negro male was castrated, the White League of Women Voters got together and decided that there had to be a prosecution for that, and that was the first time, and that was within the last 10 years. Maybe sex and racism don't go together, I don't know. There was another question. Yes, kind of behind the pole. Yeah. Against the what? She wants to know if anyone of the panel would comment on the pressure of economic power against the black man.
Yes, because the close relationship in any society between sex, whether illicit sex or marriage.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, because of the relationship between sex and economics. Joe?
Yes.
Okay.
In my opinion, there very definitely is a relationship. First, it starts with status, I think. You see, if the black man has
Sumner?
equal opportunity for economic development, this puts him in a position where in our society, women, white women, are taught to really look for security in a marriage. I really feel this is above love. And it certainly is a challenge, and it represents a lot of competition to the white man for the black man to be in an equal or even surpass him in his economic capacity to provide for a wife, a home, and so have you. So there's a very definite relationship. This goes hand in hand with also, if the black man is not able to assert his masculinity, this also serves to degrade him not only in the eyes of his white women, but in the eyes of black women also. So there very definitely is a relationship between economics and sex. Now, I'm one of those who feel, among others, that economics is at the basis of racism, as well as it is certainly a vital factor in the sex versus economics issue.
Sumner?
I'm gonna have to stop using this.
Well, I'd expect that from you, Joyce. Really would. Joyce is an anthropologist, and they come up with all sorts of weird things. There is a definite correlation between sex, a definite relationship between sex and economics. This relationship as it exists now obviously just makes a white man more desirable than the black man, even to a white woman. If you want something of a secure relationship, economically, which I think is what white women, certainly, young women are trained to look for. Now, what can he give to you? In fact, that's the basis of love. Why do you love Johnny? Well, because he comes from a Boston family, he's got a yacht, limousine, and all that. Not simply because I do, which is the only legitimate reason, it seems to me. So that puts the black man in a bad position as far as acquiring some sort of a mate by these standards only. Or if it doesn't become that important when you're talking about black women, because our culture has a totally different sort of orientation to economics and to what money is all about. Money is that which you use to get what you want, which excludes a woman, because most of you who are from ghetto areas, I'm speaking obviously to the black students, know damned well that the money getter is often the woman, which is fine. It's just an interesting twist in the roles, because there's more of a demand for the black woman on the part of the white man. he wants to marry, and the white woman wants to marry for security. See, this becomes really involved, and I'm sort of thinking it through as I go along. Wants to get married for security, but she has the same sexual drives as everybody else. Don't try to deny it. I've seen too many of you in action. The black woman, however, isn't taught that security is the important thing when approaching marriage, that love is. So she's not after security. However, money is necessary. So when the white man comes down, which happens all the time, because he puts his woman up on that pedestal, and you can only go to bed with your woman in order to have kids. And after you have so many kids, man, you just can't afford no more. So when he gets that urge in the middle of the night, he comes down to Plymouth Avenue. Now the woman can do exactly the same thing, but she has to pay for it as well, in many different ways. New cars, apartments, stereos, all that. So you're dealing with two totally different orientations to money. And in a purely black to black relationship, it doesn't matter that much. When we're talking about the typical black culture. In a white to white or white to black relationship, it really does matter a great deal. Because whites are trained to view love in terms of security, in terms of material gain. See? Is that all right?
Penny, I'm going to have to close.
I understand that there was a lot of, that some students felt that they would be interested in this today, and some felt that they would be very apathetic. Your presence, I think, speaks for itself. I hope that maybe we can continue this kind of dialogue and discussion at another time. We have run out of time. I'm being pressured by Ron to permit one more question, and we'll have to make it very short. Who was that?
Penny has a question.
Penny?
I don't know who I'm addressing it to. I wondered if you feel that widespread interracial marriage is the best or one of the most significant ways to solve the community?
1 minute. He's going to answer it already.
No, I do not. Why should it be necessary to destroy one race? Why should it be necessary to destroy a black race? I'm very, very pleased with what I am. I can enjoy everything that anyone else in this room can enjoy as I am. And I feel that that's a very coward way of not meeting the issue head on. Look, I don't advocate, even though I have an interracial marriage, I don't necessarily advocate that. I don't necessarily advocate marriage. I advocate what people, two people, whatever they decide that they want to do, this is what they should do. No, I've heard that asked many times. I certainly do not, and I don't really feel that this is going to come about, because I, for one, would certainly fight it with all means that I would have at my disposal.
Ron wants the last word.
I think when couples want to marry, they should, but it shouldn't be a social program. But I do think that here again the interracial adoption does get children, black children, mixed children, into places where they otherwise wouldn't be, and the people on our block now are integrated whether they want to be or not. Sumner wanted one last word.
I think that what we're dealing with is a question that has to be dealt with. It's a question of recognizing humanity, where humanity does exist. Now, if we were to intermarry whites and blacks, you'd refuse humanity to some other group. And I know that there are other groups that you refuse humanity to. So it's not a question of, let's mingle and wipe out the problem. What we want to do is get a culture accepted as a legitimate culture. A way of life is a legitimate way of life, although it may be different than yours. You see? And if you can't do it with black people, you can't do it with anybody. So the question cannot possibly be solved by massive intermarriages. It can only be solved by confronting the real problem, which isn't black people. The problem is not black people. It's your way of thinking about not only black people, but any other group that happens to be in the minority. The only minority problem is the majority.
Thank you very, very much.